In today's episode, we are talking all about boosting egg quality while undergoing IVF or egg freezing. There are different things to keep in mind when going through IVF or egg freezing, in particular when it comes to supporting our eggs, which I talk all about in this episode. And I give some really practical tips, some of which you probably haven't heard about, and a lot of different things to bring into your life so that you can optimize this time, improve your eggs, which ultimately improves the quality of your embryos, which results in better transfers, healthier pregnancies, healthier babies, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. And unfortunately, is not done or supported as much as it should be, or maybe in the holistic way that it should be. So we break it all down for you with lots and lots of goodies and tips. And this applies whether you are going through IVF or not. If you're just trying to conceive naturally and want to boost your egg quality, many of these things will apply to you as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Healthy as a Mother, the podcast for becoming and being a mother, with your co-hosts, Dr. Leah Gordon and Dr. Morgan McDermott, two naturopathic doctors who get it.
Each week, we teach you how to be the healthiest mother you can be, from fertility and preconception to pregnancy and birth prep, through postpartum and throughout motherhood, empowering you with the natural health guidance and education you're not getting elsewhere, so you can confidently navigate the broken system at large.
The real, the raw, the untalked about. And remember, this information is not intended to diagnose, treat, or manage any disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes. Let's take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. Having adequate levels of minerals and proper hydration are essential when balancing your hormones, optimizing your fertility, trying to conceive, or preparing for pregnancy. For Dr. Morgan and I, ingredient quality is of top concern, and that's why we love Relight Electrolyte Powders by Redmond's Real Salt. Relight contains Redmond's ancient, unrefined sea salt, which contains 60 plus trace minerals in and of itself. Relight powders conveniently contain the appropriate proportions and forms of calcium, potassium, chloride, and even 2 forms of magnesium, malate and glycinate. These are essential for hormone balance, energy production, and overall wellness. The best part is they taste delicious and they have so many fun flavors. My personal favorite is lemon lime, but I know Dr. Morgan loves their strawberry lemonade. Visit redmond.life and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15% off any of Redmond's products, from their electrolytes to their OG sea salt, other seasoning salts, natural toothpaste, and bentonite clays. Again, visit redmond.life and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15%. Here's to happy hydrating along your womanhood and fertility journey. Okay, back to the show.
Okay, so we are here together today where you, Dr. Leah, are going to lead us through all of your top tips and expertise and wisdom and also personal experience too, which is really cool, of the things that you can do when you're planning on an egg retrieval or an egg freezing event. What do you call that?
Event. I guess it's an event. It's a life event. Maybe you can get health insurance, because supposedly you can get a health insurance when you have a life event. No, I don't think they count that. An experience. I don't know what you call that.
An appointment, I guess, although it's quite larger than that.
Bigger than an appointment. We should come up with that. I don't know what that is.
We'll coin the term, whatever it is. But there's things that can be done to improve your egg quality. And it, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast, but just in case this is like the first one you're listening to, takes about 90 days to affect the health of either a sperm or an egg. And we'll tell you about why. But then really this episode is going to be all about some of the things that you can be doing, because those are then now the eggs that you're going to be collecting to become your future children. And, you can really put a lot of concerted effort into this as like your preconception time, really.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that can be done, and this is literally no better person to ask than you. So let's dive in.
Thanks. I love how we build each other up all the time.
Yes.
Our words of affirmation to each other. Okay, so I'm talking specifically in the context of IVF and egg freezing. However, everything that I talk about can be utilized for anyone who's trying to conceive naturally. We're just talking about super boosting. And and I'm going to speak about that and why. And then there's a few things that are specific for IVF that we wouldn't necessarily want to do naturally when we're trying. And so I'm going to break down the differences between them.
Oh, that's interesting. Something you wouldn't want to do.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear it.
Okay. So first and foremost, like you mentioned, we are actually born as women with all of our eggs. Our eggs are developing when we are developing as little embryos inside of our mother. So we are born with them stopped in a specific phase of their development. There are lots of phases of the development of eggs and sperm in males. There's lots of different things that they go through, mitosis, meiosis, like those kind of things. If you remember back to your high school, science classes, it's very complicated. I'm not going to get into the details, but just know that they stop at a form of development when you're born. And then once you as a woman start having your period, once you go through menarche, then every month a group of those follicles or those immature eggs get to mature in the 2 weeks before you ovulate. And they pick, or the body picks one in particular, that one dominant follicle that becomes the egg that you ovulate, that you can then become pregnant with, or if it doesn't work out, you then get a period 2 weeks later. So it's just like a high level overview.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah, of
I have
course.
like a few burning questions on the tips of my tongues, as if I have many tongues.
You're reading too much fantasy.
I know.
Tips of all 5 of my tongues. No, that's not funny. I've never seen that.
Like when they say "oh gods" with
Oh
like
yeah.
plural, it's so funny. Okay, wait a minute. So I knew this, but I don't know this particular nuance of this question. So when the multiple different follicles are sort of being recruited before the one dominant one is going to become the egg that's released that month, are they in close proximity of each other? Is it like a little grouping in one part of the ovary, or is it like random throughout the entire ovary?
Wow, that's a great question. And I actually don't know the answer to that.
I don't really know if it would ever be significant. It's just curious because it's like, how are they
Yeah.
chosen?
Yeah. Oh gosh. One of the mysteries of life, right? Like, just add it to the list. How are they chosen? Gosh, it's so, I don't know. I mean, that's like the number one question because people will, there's the scientific thought and explanation, and no one really knows because you could say, well, it's the highest quality eggs that are chosen. But then if that were the case, women would probably never have children with Down syndrome, for example. Because that was clear. Like if you conceive naturally and you have a child with Down syndrome, that was a embryo that had a chromosomal abnormality. So there's some component, whether it's on the egg or the sperm side, that wasn't maybe the most optimal from a, not that children with Down syndrome aren't as perfect and amazing as other children, but if you're coming at it from a chromosomal abnormality only, then you would say theoretically that would never happen. Then there's a lot of spiritual thoughts about it, like, well, maybe that's the baby that you were supposed to have for a life lesson, or like, there's so many places we could go with it from a scientific perspective, from a spiritual perspective, from a it's totally random and there's no rhyme or reason to it perspective, and no one knows at the end of the day. But I don't know that question. I'm sure someone's researching it somewhere. I'll have to look it up after this as to if they know proximity wise which follicles get grouped together. It's a good question.
Yeah, I didn't know that there was such a I didn't know that that was a thing of, I guess it makes sense. I just had never really thought about it because this is your world, not really mine. But the idea that people are wondering, yeah, how are those eggs recruited? There's probably some chemoreceptors and whatever. But that is so
Yeah.
fascinating and interesting. How many ish? Okay, here's one more question that really doesn't matter. But how many are like discarded, recruited,
No,
but then they don't become the one?
that totally matters because we're talking about IVF and egg freezing. So
Okay.
this is the difference between natural conception and IVF and egg freezing, because you become very aware of how many follicles are recruited,
Oh, okay.
because the difference between conceiving naturally or unassisted and going through IVF or egg freezing is that we are trying to turn all those follicles that are initially recruited, where one becomes dominant and becomes the egg that you ovulate in natural conception. We're trying to turn that whole group into
Oh,
eggs that could be babies.
right. Okay. Yes, this makes sense.
So, but that is the difference because, there's a big conversation, and I'm not really here to like say one thing is right or another. I have my own personal beliefs about it, especially going through IVF and having children through this process, where people get really upset about, embryos and what does that mean? And is that life? And, all of that. And it's tricky because in the pursuit of trying to create a child through IVF, especially in situations like Mike and I, where we literally wouldn't be able to otherwise, you might make more embryos than you want children because you are creating with the egg retrieval, you have to recruit many follicles to mature them to become eggs. And then you don't know how well those eggs are going to fertilize with sperm. So you have to try. I mean, there are some people that do single egg, single sperm IVF. Yeah.
No
Yes.
way.
Yes. And it is possible and very time consuming and very expensive.
Expensive. Yes.
So, that was an option I had looked into because I was so against taking medicine and doing all of these things to conceive. And that's how they did IVF back in the day before they knew. If you watch, there's an amazing documentary called I think it's just called Joy. It's not a documentary. Oh my gosh. It's a really well done movie, but it tracks the real story of how IVF came to be. And the first embryo, her middle name was Joy. They're the first embryo that became a human who was born and was healthy. And it's a really, really good movie, I think. But you can see in those first early years, that's what they were doing. They were just trying to collect that one egg and do it, in vitro outside of the body. And so this brings us back to the whole concept of those follicles and those eggs and why boosting egg quality is so important in this scenario, because the analogy that I like to use, and I'm sure I've shared on the podcast before, and I teach it in my courses, but is really important for people to understand, is imagine that you have one apple and you have one child. And they're sitting at the table and you're like, I'm going to feed my child because I love them so much. And I'm going to give them this apple and they're very well fed. Wonderful. That is what is happening when you conceive naturally. Your body has created this group of follicles, but one becomes dominant for whatever reason, whether it's a scientific reason, a random reason, a God reason, who knows. It then starts to take all of the hormones and all of the nutrients and says, I'm the chosen one. I'm going to take it all. I'm going to take it all. So you have this individual child getting all of the apple, right? They're well nourished, well taken care of. Awesome. In IVF, you now say, okay, I have one apple, but now I have 10 kids. They're all sitting at the table and they're all hungry. You have to take that one apple and split it into 10 different parts. And so each child now only has a tenth of an apple. So now all of them are kind of malnourished and no one's very happy. So this is what happens in IVF when we are creating more eggs than the one. So we need to bring in more apples. Ideally, we have 10 apples, right? Ideally, we bring in more nutrients. We do extra things in our lifestyle. We do extra stuff for our mitochondria. We bring in more antioxidants, potentially different supplements at different dosages, because we are now trying to divide that among more than just one egg. They
Wow.
all need nutrients. They all need mitochondrial support. And if you don't do that, not that you can't have a healthy child, but the likelihood of your eggs being really all great quality and then have tons of high quality embryos goes down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy. I had never really thought of that before, how if you're going to stimulate all of those follicles to become actual mature eggs instead of just the one, yeah, somehow you do need that overabundance even more so than like in a normal sense, which can be hard enough for people to maintain or to gain. But I guess in some way, with wrapping your mind around the protocol that you're going to kind of talk about, you're just sort of doing it for a shorter period of time and like once, I guess, like, so it's
Yep.
like really, really go for it. In
Yeah,
that shorter
exactly. So
time.
that is the one thing about the difference between trying to conceive and being like month after month after month. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I take all these supplements forever and do all of this and, wake up and do this and like it's exhausting. And it's actually much harder personally, I think, to be in that, like, maybe this month, I can't go on that vacation. I don't want to fly on that airplane. I don't want to drink that alcohol, because every month could be the month, versus when you're doing IVF, specifically, okay, I'm going to take these next 3 to 4 months and really optimize me and my partner, we're going to be so good, right? And then we're going to do an egg retrieval. We're going to make embryos. And hopefully, that really concentrated effort that I put into that will pay off, right? With higher quality embryos. And that eventually turns into, hopefully, successful pregnancies, successful transfers, pregnancies, and healthy children. So, with that, like you mentioned, it takes about 90 days for sperm and eggs to mature. So I'm going to go back to that conversation I initially had where we're born with our eggs stopping at a certain place. Then once we start our periods, once we start menarche, every month a group of follicles, it gets chosen and then the one is dominant. What people don't realize is that for about 4 months before ovulation in a woman, that maturation process is starting to happen where they're coming out of their like arrested or stopped phase and things are starting to shift and change with the eggs and the follicles. So it's not a 2-week process from period to ovulation, even though that is a time that we see a lot of rapid growth. It's actually a 3 to 4 month process that happens before you ovulate, where your diet, your lifestyle, your supplementation, your exposures, your stresses impact the quality of those eggs.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just to put
Love it.
context for people, that's why I'm not saying just do this for 2 weeks. That's all you need. Really, ideally, we are doing this a minimum of 3 months, but I would say 4, even in the IVF space. If you have the time, I've been there. Trust me, I get it when you're like, no, I can't take 3 months more. I like need to be pregnant, right? But if you really pull back and just take that time to intentionally improve your and your partner's sperm, which is a whole different conversation, for those 3 to 4 months before you do an egg retrieval and embryo creation, or just an egg retrieval if you're doing freezing, it will absolutely be worth your time, I think, personally, and knowing what I know and the research and in practice. So, worth your time. So, what are those things? First and foremost, the important thing we need to understand about eggs is that they are a concentration of mitochondria. Mitochondria, everyone kind of talks about them as the energy powerhouses of the cell. If you ever took high school biology class, they're the ones that look like a kidney bean and then have like zigzags on the inside, if you ever had to draw them. And inside of mitochondria is where we make energy. So ATP is a form of energy in our body, and the mitochondria make energy. And energy is everything. Energy is what allows us to make more DNA. It's what allows us to divide cells correctly. It's what allows for everything in our body to function optimally. So, mitochondria are really important. And an egg cell has, I think it's 40 times more mitochondria than any other cell. Don't quote me on that exactly, but it's a significant amount more. The sperm and the egg are basically just little mitochondria, like trying to reproduce, get together. So when we talk about how to support egg quality, a lot of it actually comes down to supporting the mitochondria. So people might have heard like, this is mitochondrial support, or this thing supports the mitochondria. Anytime you hear that, think, oh, that also supports eggs. So if you see something about, let's just start with this one that I'm thinking is off the top of my head, which is red light. Red light's super popular right now. A lot of people are talking about it online, and it's very much in the biohacking space. And people will be like, it boosts your mitochondria. And very rarely is it actually talked about in the context of fertility. But anytime someone's talking about boosting mitochondria, supporting mitochondria, always think, oh, that probably helps with egg quality, because it does. So, red light is one of those things that I'm going to talk about that a lot of people don't know about. So, studies have shown that it improves the mitochondria, that it improves egg quality. So, this is something that you can do. It also improves blood circulation. So, when we talk about supporting our eggs, we want to talk about the mitochondria. We want to talk about reducing oxidative stress, which I'll get into, improving circulation. Okay, so our eggs, in order to be healthy, in order to give those little children all of their nutrients, they need nutrition. They need to not be stressed out and covered in toxins, right? So just think about what would make your children thrive. They need to be well fed. They need to not be like super stressed out. They need to sleep, right? They need to be sleeping. And then they need to have a movement, like your child needs to move their body. So we need blood circulation to get those nutrients to the eggs and to get toxins away from the eggs. Red light does all of that. It helps boost the mitochondria. Light is actually a really fascinating form of medicine, and it's becoming more and more, I would say popular, but popular is not the word because we live in the sun and we always have. It's not like light is new and popular, but I think more attention and research is being done around how incredibly important light is. And when we are out in the sun has red light, especially when the sun is rising and setting. That's the highest amount of red light. It does have some blue light, which is the light that comes from our screens and our devices, our computers, our laptops, and stuff that actually is not very good for us. And it has infrared light. When people talk about being in an infrared sauna, these are all devices that are trying to capture these light frequencies that the sun gives us naturally. But unfortunately, many of us aren't outside all day. So we don't get those healing benefits of the light like we should, even though that would be a great tip. But if someone's trying to focus and concentrate on boosting egg quality, especially in 3 to 4 months for IVF, then getting something like a red light device and putting on your ovaries, on your abdomen for 20 to 30 minutes a few times a week can be really helpful at actually getting the mitochondria the light that it needs to not only improve the mitochondria, improve circulation, but also help with oxidative stress. So that would be my first tip is red light.
Okay, I
Speaking
love
of
that. I just think that it's so cool how I agree with you. Like the idea that it's popular is so funny because it's just really like
light,
a remembering of hello, the sun in the sky.
yeah.
But we are inside like 23 hours a day. You know what I mean? And so if we're not going to be out in that setting naturally and also to have different parts of our body exposed to the skin as well or exposed to the sun then these devices can be really really cool. I used to sort of be like, "Oh my god, like come on. Let's just
Mhm.
go outside, to
Yeah.
harness." But no, I mean, they have such a therapeutic amazing targeted benefit if we use them the right way.
Well, and absolutely go outside. Like this wasn't a part of my original script, but let's talk about that because if you could go outside in the sun barefoot, do the grounding, and the science behind that, let's just talk about that really quick because this helps egg quality as well, is disease happens in the body when we have a lot of positive charge. Now, if you ever went into chemistry or learned anything in high school, I'm obviously assuming you all took science classes in high school, but it's really hard to necessarily remember all of that stuff. But if you remember, there's positive and negative charges, electrons, all of that. When we are in our daily lives, we come into contact with a lot of things and insults and all sorts of stuff. And what it does is it creates positive charge in the body. You guys have, in America, at least in the United States, we have outlets that have a little uh, thing in the center that is called a grounding. Uh, it's a grounding wire, a grounding platform, whatever. If we have a platform, I'm not an electrical engineer. It's like a grounding option to ground things. So to ground something, like if your refrigerator or some other electrical thing were to like go on the fritz, it would blow up. And that's why it's grounded. Things are grounded. Our electricity is grounded. Literally, that means it's touching the ground because the earth is negative and it can take all of that positive charge and make it safe. So, any electrician or anybody who deals with electricity understands grounding, and we have it built into every outlet and all of our stuff so that we don't blow ourselves up all the time. It's true. And so grounding discharges that positive energy, those positive cations, And that ultimately in the body leads to healing. And the thing that grounds us, that takes our positive charge, that helps us to get rid of that disease causing, oxidative stress causing positive charge is the earth. We are designed and meant to touch the earth with our bodies and to be in the sun in the light. And unfortunately, we wear rubber soled shoes, so we're not actually touching the earth because rubber is an insulator. Plastic is an insulator. That's why we put plastic and rubber around electrical wires because they insulate them. So we aren't often touching the earth, and we need to. So if you can get outside, be barefoot, and be in the sun, obviously awesome. If you're trying to conceive, take off your shirt, obviously keep your bra on if you want, whatever, free holiday, and get light on you. But I understand the reality that a lot of people can't do that. And they're busy, or it's like it is here in Idaho right now where it's dark when we wake up because of daylight savings. And I hate it so much right now. So that's where using things like red light therapy, you can even get grounding mats that you can have inside that plug into the grounding apparatus of your outlets to get the benefit if you can't get outside, even though being outside is ideal. So tip number 1, red light. Tip number 2, grounding. Tip number 3 is antioxidants. Antioxidants, again, a lot of what we have to do to improve egg quality is combat what the world and what living in our modern world is doing to us, which feels frustrating. I get that. Toxins, inflammatory foods, stuff our body just makes naturally as part of the process of being human, all of these can create what's called oxidative damage in the body. And at the end of the day, if we want to zoom out and talk about egg and sperm quality, all you need to do is have a formula where you have more positive things than negative things.
Yeah.
And the positive things are balanced hormones, antioxidants, balanced stress, whatever, versus negative things. If you have more oxidative damage, more toxins, more stress, lack of sleep, and that is more than the positive, you're going to have a net imbalance in your quality. So with antioxidants, they are antioxidants. They are antioxidative damage.
I love it when the name is intuitive.
But like a lot of people don't. I mean, I remember in nutrition, I remember these aha moments in my life where I'm like, oh, antioxidant, because we grow up seeing like vitamin C is an antioxidant. Eat your oranges, and I just remember being in college and learning about oxidants and being like, oh my God. Like it was one of those moments where I was like, antioxidant. Oh, it's like blowing my mind, And so I remember these moments, and I nerded out on biochemistry, and nutritional biochemistry was my absolute favorite class of all time. I'm just like, this is so cool. And at the end of the day, a lot of egg quality is optimizing your biochemistry. So antioxidants combat those oxidative damage. Why do you care? Oxidative damage, whatever. Oxidative damage damages DNA. When we have things in our body that are damaging us, they break down our DNA, and that leads to chromosomal abnormalities in embryos. That leads to poor quality eggs. It can lead to the start of diseases like cancer. So another thing is if you ever see anything that's like really good for cancer, anti-cancer, also think that's good for egg quality. Because when we damage DNA, that gives it more chances to mess up and cause things like cancer and chromosomal abnormalities and other things that lead to fertility problems. They're very closely connected. It does not mean that if you have infertility that you're going to get cancer. I just want to make that clear. I'm just saying that oxidative damage does the same thing in the body. It damages DNA, and we do not want that. It can also lead to miscarriages, right? Because if you don't have a good foundation and good health for good DNA production, you can't develop and rapidly grow cells to make a new human. So it's important. With IVF, though, we're kind of pulling it out of the body and we're seeing what's happening before potentially a miscarriage happens. which if you're conceiving naturally, you might not know that maybe that embryo had a chromosomal abnormality. That's why it resulted in miscarriage. In IVF, we might have caught that by saying, oh, we tested this embryo and it actually has a chromosomal abnormality. This won't be conducive to life. Let's take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. I want to talk to you about the egg quality support from Needed. When we are trying to conceive, it's really important that we have healthy eggs. And our healthy eggs are determined by the level of oxidative damage in our body. In order to combat that, we want antioxidants. We also want to have healthy mitochondria. The eggs are a concentration of a ton of mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cells. And there are certain nutrients that support the mitochondria. In Needed's egg quality support, we have designed it to be a blend of powerful antioxidants and mitochondrial support, so that when you take this supplement, you are supporting both of those things, oxidative damage and the mitochondria, both of which greatly impact egg quality. I also love to pair it with their CoQ10, which is another powerful antioxidant and mitochondrial support. So their egg quality paired with their CoQ10 is the perfect blend on top of their prenatal, if you have that, to get all of your vitamins and minerals, to have the perfect little package of egg quality support on your journey trying to conceive. Whether you are trying naturally or you're navigating IVF or egg freezing, you really, really, really want to support that. So head to thisisneeded.com and check out the fertility egg quality support and their CoQ10. Use code HealthyMother to save 20% on your first order. Again, head to thisisneeded.com and use code HealthyMother to save 20%. Okay, back to the show. So antioxidants are huge. Eating colorful fruits and vegetables are a big place that you get antioxidants. The more deeply colored, the better. So think deep colored berries, blackberries, blueberries, all the berries, very high in antioxidants. Things like your citrus fruits, your oranges, your peppers, anything colorful really have antioxidants in them. They all have different names for them, all the different colors. Like blues have a specific type of antioxidant, and red food has a specific antioxidant. So the more that you can do that, the better. Now, some people feel better eating more animal-based foods and not eating a lot of plants. And I get that too. Diet is very individual. If that's the case and you can't eat tons and tons of antioxidant-rich foods, or if you just want to supercharge it, this is where supplements can come in. In particular, the most well-studied supplement is CoQ10 or coenzyme Q10. And this is a antioxidant nutrient, but it's also a mitochondrial supportive nutrient. So anytime a nutrient, again, is saying antioxidant or mitochondrial support, think, that's good for egg quality. So CoQ10 is one of those. For a normal person who's just trying to optimize fertility, I would maybe say a dose of 200 milligrams would be sufficient. But in the IVF space, remember our apple analogy? I really think 400 to 600 milligrams a day is more ideal, because we need to give more antioxidants to all of these little children, all these little eggs. So that's typically what I recommend. There are other antioxidants like Needed. I helped formulate their egg quality support that has a lot of different antioxidants like ALA, PQQ, L-carnitine. These are a blend of antioxidants and mitochondrial support paired with their CoQ10 or their coenzyme Q10. Those are things that you can do from a supplemental perspective to bring in antioxidants. So far we've talked about red light, grounding, antioxidants. The other thing I want to talk about is sleep. And sleep actually is important because of just sleep, because of resting and giving your body a break. There's a lot of detox and other processes that happen while we sleep. And if we don't go into sleep, they cannot happen. However, with the conversation about sleep, I also need to talk about light again. Our hormones and our ovulation and our eggs and our ovaries are so sensitive to light. It's crazy. There is a reason why a woman, which you might not know this, but before light pollution, which is light pollution is all the artificial light that we have everywhere. Inside are light bulbs, especially LED, blue light bulbs, but all the light everywhere. Before light pollution, or in the absence of light pollution, women tend to start to cycle with the moon. Not because it's like wooey and like, oh, I'm connected to the moon, even though I love that stuff. It's because of the light. It's because the full moon, actually, the light from the full moon triggers us to sync to that. And there have been studies with women who have irregular cycles who put on a nightlight in their room to mimic the full moon at the time that it should be. And just sleeping in that light regulates their cycles because their ovaries respond to it. It's
Wow.
crazy.
I love that because I remember learning that initially in one of my anthropology classes in college, that ovulating with the full moon
Yep.
and having your cycle with the new moon, because under the full moon light you can like see your partner
Oh yeah.
and you
That's
can get pregnant.
crazy.
Yeah,
There you
and like,
go.
isn't that crazy? And I was just like, what?
Wow. I love your anthropomorphic tips. It's
Yeah.
not even right.
I mean, it just makes so much sense, you guys. Like, we are animals, and I don't know. I feel like there's people who feel like insulted by that, and I think it's so beautiful. Like, I don't feel insulted by that at all. I feel like so deeply connected with the way that the Earth is and our biological patterns and how we fit in ecology and all these different things that you're saying. I'm just like, yeah, yep, exactly. Like if we were outside all the time, like we were meant to be before we built buildings. I
Mhm.
mean, we always had shelters and things, but that was more to like, seek literal just refuge from the weather and then to stay
Yeah.
protected from animals and stuff. It's not like we were hanging out in there all day long.
Yeah, and the
It's
light, I mean, it's like you didn't have artificial light. You had fire, which is red light, and then you had the moon. And maybe once like candles came around, that's still like not blue light. It's not the stuff that we're being exposed to all the time.
yeah, it's still a natural light. It's still a flame. It's not,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it is really interesting. I wish that people could understand the very, very profound effect of our modern living habits on these kinds of things. It's like taking a shark and putting them in a tank, or like a whale at SeaWorld or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh well, they're in
Mhm.
water. Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, they're in water. It's like, yeah, don't you think it's a little different than the ocean? Like, don't you
Yeah.
do you see that? And hence why they don't live very long. They get depressed. They have like that tail fin flop over disorder or whatever it is. And like, it's just, we have taken ourselves into such an artificial environment, and we wonder why all this stuff is happening. Or
Yeah.
it's easy to kind of be like, no, that doesn't matter, that can't matter. And it's like, no, it really, really does
It
matter.
really does. And I know that the foundations are so unfun for people to like talk about. And this is why it's like turn a foundation into a biohack. If you need it to be a device, or you need it to be a supplement, or you need it to be something that I'm doing more than just being outside, cool. Get a red light device, take some supplements, but understand why you're doing it. All we're doing is trying to make better what nature already provides, what we already have if we were living in rhythm. And, if people are offended by the idea that we're animals, then just think of us as earth beings. We are earth beings. We evolved, whether you believe in evolution or not, there is a time of us adapting and evolving to our environment that we have drastically changed in the last 100 years. So, wherever people believe that we came from and all of that doesn't matter. We as beings have been living on the earth in a way forever until just like 100 years ago. So it's just different. We're like, why is everyone sick? Why can no one reproduce? What's going on? It's like we have to look at that. And that brings me back to sleep. So sleep is obviously important, for egg quality and IVF for sure. But why I bring it back to sleep is more important than just sleep. It's because of melatonin. When we talk about the sun, being out in the sun, yes, there's different frequencies of light from the sun and all this stuff that are helpful. The sun also encourages cortisol production. And cortisol is our energy hormone. A lot of people call it our stress hormone because if you have too much stress, you will have a lot of cortisol. But cortisol also gives you energy. It's what allows you to wake up in the morning and feel like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go do my day. Exercise increases cortisol, sunlight increases cortisol, and that's important because that's your daytime hormone. Nighttime is a time for melatonin. Cortisol should be ramping down and melatonin should be ramping up, and melatonin is high when we are sleeping. However, melatonin is very, very much impacted by light. Remember, because sunlight, light, blue light, red light, all these things increase cortisol. And when cortisol is there, melatonin is down. When we have all the bright lights on in the house at the end of the day and we're watching the screen and we're scrolling on our phone and we're watching TV and we have all of these sources of light, they are going to block our melatonin. If we are sleeping in a room that is not dark, or we don't sleep with an eye mask, which is the level of darkness that we should have if we were outside minus the full moon time, then we are not producing adequate amounts of melatonin. And why this is important for egg quality is melatonin is a hormone, but it's also a major antioxidant, but it communicates very specially with the eggs and the ovaries. It's a very, very important thing for egg health. And why I brought this up in IVF context, this is one of those things that in IVF, if you are going through IVF or egg freezing, the studies are pretty clear that taking supplemental melatonin actually improves egg quality and embryo quality. So if you especially are someone who struggles with sleep, bringing in, 3 to 10 milligrams of melatonin before bedtime could be helpful. This is a hormone. This is not medical advice. Obviously, talk to your doctor. Some people will feel really groggy with that. 1 milligram is even too much for some people because it's your sleep hormone. It will make you sleepy. Interestingly enough, melatonin is also implicated in cancer support. I wonder why, because they're the same. But if you are trying to conceive naturally and you're taking melatonin consistently, like every night, it can actually disrupt your ovulation.
Because why?
Because light and ovaries and melatonin, they're all so connected.
It's like too sensitive. Like you don't need additional
Yeah,
supplemental.
it's throwing off that already hormonal rhythm and balance. So it's not to say that it absolutely will and that you cannot conceive by taking melatonin, but you wouldn't want to take large amounts of melatonin for many, many days. And especially remember how I just said with IVF, we can do these concentrated things for a period of time and then pull back. It's not like I'm trying to conceive for 15 months. I've been taking melatonin every single night. It's like, first of all, if you need melatonin every night to sleep, that's a bigger problem, right, that we need to address. So this is a time period, a window of time that I would say for 3 to 4 months that you could take supplemental melatonin potentially in prep for egg retrieval to improve outcomes. But hopefully that's not a crutch you have to depend on to sleep. And that's not something that you would want to take necessarily, pre-ovulation if you're trying to conceive naturally.
Well, and this is leading me to think too about women who are, breastfeeding all throughout the night. And I know that they're in a lactational physiology, or just tending to children, night parenting, even if they're not lactating anymore. And that being such a barrier to conceiving in general, and just having your disrupted melatonin, you're having cortisol spikes in the middle of the night. And it
Yeah,
reminded me of, because you said daytime and then you said nighttime. It reminded
I took that little bird. I know.
daytime, nighttime,
Mhm.
daytime, nighttime. It's like the original meme. It was like a Planet Earth
It
clip of that
was the
bird.
original meme. Oh my
Yes.
god. So
Anyways,
good.
I think that it's and there's so many different reasons why having sometimes like young little children could prevent somebody from conceiving. But I know that when people want to do them back to back, it's like, yeah, if our nighttime is severely disrupted, our ovulation is going to be off. Like if you're getting that longer stretch and all sorts of different pathways are happening in that, it's not even just like so that you actually drop an egg. It's so that like the egg that you drop is of the healthiest quality possible.
Yeah. And if you look at it from, I don't even know if evolutionary perspective is the right word to use, but more like, I don't know, what would you call it when you're like studying ancient peoples? Like
Yeah, like
that's
anthropological perspective.
anthropological perspective. So same like you said, there's so much intertwined in that if you're up all night, getting cortisol spikes, feeding your baby, showing your body the full moonlight, whatever, and you're not ovulating, that also protects you from having children too close together.
Yeah. Mhm.
And because you're just not supposed to necessarily conceive when you have a brand new baby, that is protective of you and your children to some degree. And it's just unfortunate that our modern world is like, well, I'm in this bright light and I'm getting cortisol spikes because I'm answering my emails or I'm watching a stressful show or I'm, waking up in the middle of the night and checking my phone. It's like your body's like, oh, you must have a baby. You must have a really stressful, very, very challenging situation. You cannot get pregnant right now. That
Yeah,
would be
this
terrible for everybody. Like that's what this and not ancestral, but like this primitive part of your body is saying. And so we have to give our body the clues and the sensory information all day, every day that I am like calm, I am rested, I am well fed, I am nourished. Because only when the body gets those signals does it say, okay, we can prioritize nutrients to your eggs. Otherwise, I'm going to hold these nutrients because you might need to run from a tiger, right? So this brings me into my next tip, which is stress. And stress is such a triggering concept in the fertility world because people hate being told to reduce their stress. And I get it. And it's not necessarily that you have to reduce your stress, it's that you need to create more stress resiliency. At the end of the day, resiliency is optimal health. Resiliency meaning I can go out into the world and not be completely shattered by it. I can be pulled over by a police officer and not have the most intense like panic attack of my entire life. I can just gratefully accept the ticket and pay it with gratitude, which is what I did the other day.
I was gonna say, are you insinuating any personal experiences here, Leah?
Yes, because I was pulled over like last year and it was in the mountains and I was deep in conversation with my sister and I didn't realize coming around a turn that it turned into a school zone in the middle of the mountains where there are no people. Okay. So didn't know. Sorry that you literally changed the speed limit around a curve. He's like, that's a school. It was like a weird cabin in the woods that no one was at. I was just like, oh my God. But anyways, I got really panicked because I had just moved to Idaho, so I didn't know where my license and not my license, my registration. And I was like, I just remember like that panic in my body and like feeling that adrenaline and that cortisol in that moment, being like, oh my gosh, this is the most stressful thing. I felt it for like weeks after, like that adrenaline rush. I hate being in trouble. It was just terrible, whatever. The other day, I'm rushing home because I need to feed my baby. I was at an event. I was going too fast on the highway, also immersed in a podcast, totally not paying attention. I recognize it's my fault. He gives me a ticket. And I was just like, you know what? You're a nice guy. You probably have kids at home. You're just doing your job. Thank you for keeping us safe. Like, I'm going to pay this ticket with gratitude. And I just remember the difference in my hormones, the difference in my stress levels, the difference in how I felt, how it impacted me on my mental health, everything about it. So the situations were exactly the same. I got pulled over by a cop and I got a ticket both times. Both times I had to put out money at a time when, like, that's not what we're trying to do right now in our lives. It's like the situations were exactly the same. And the two different ways that my body responded, reacted, and like dealt with it were so drastically different. So that's what I'm talking about a lot with stress resiliency is it's not necessarily that you can change the external environment. People be like, I can't just live in a bubble and like lay on my bed all day. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about. Maybe you do need to quit your job or, distance yourself from a toxic relationship or, get help or something physically in the environment. But a lot of times it's shifting our resiliency and our perspective to the things that are happening to us.
Mhm.
Because stress is a killer. Because what stress does, what does it do? It increases oxidative damage. It takes away the nutrients from our eggs and puts them elsewhere. Because the primitive part of our body says, you're so stressed. Let me feel all these hormones. You're not in a good place to have a baby. We're not going to take that magnesium and give it to your ovary that needs it for eggs. I'm going to go put that in your muscles because you're probably going to need to run away from this really scary cop, this very scary lion, this very scary email, like whatever. So your body will redistribute nutrients away from your fertility in times of stress. Stress increases oxidative damage that we know damages eggs. It disrupts the mitochondria, which we know damages eggs. So stress is something that I understand is much more complex. I have a whole course on stress. And so I get it. You can't just be told reduce your stress. It's the most infuriating thing, especially for someone trying to conceive. But there is a very, very real reality to that impacting your egg quality. So getting support around that, whether it's going to a therapist, working on past trauma, your patterns, your belief systems, getting things physically set up in your world are huge. So that's the next tip. And I just have one more to leave you with.
Really, really quick. I just want to say about stress. And again, I mean, there's so many things in this episode that do go back to this, human animal part of us. And it
Mhm.
is so smart. Like, thank goodness that our bodies can sense the external factors that we're working with. This is kind of like, during the Irish potato famine, women who were pregnant during that famine, the babies that were born of those pregnancies had metabolic syndrome issues where they really held on to calories in a different kind of way because they were preparing to be born into a famine.
Yeah.
Like, there is a beautiful reason why our bodies are the way that they are. It's just that a lot of it's kind of like that trend that's going around now on social media that's like, my nervous system can't tell the difference between, like an angry email and a lion chasing me. And it's
Oh,
just the idea of any kind of modern thing. You could say, like, can't tell the difference between my toddler yelling at me and a lion chasing me, because
yeah.
you still get that reaction, that like adrenaline hopped up, that whole thing. And it's like, that is our sympathetic nervous system there to protect us. But when we have it activated constantly all the time, if that is one of the cogs in the wheel of why you're not getting pregnant, or in this case, I know that it's like, we want to have the healthiest egg quality possible. So it's like, that is probably going to be one of those situations that is going to be taken away from the opportunity to optimize here. So we need to get this under control. And this is a little different, but it reminded me of something that I learned when I worked with the bears, Bear World.
Bears. Yeah,
Which
Dr.
was
Morgan has the most eclectic past history.
experience. My resume is bizarre, but is that like mother bears get pregnant right before hibernation,
Mm-hmm.
and they grow and gestate their babies all throughout hibernation. And then they birth them still in hibernation, and like nurse them in the early stages still in hibernation.
Wow.
And so if they did not prepare their bodies with enough nutrients, sometimes they will begin to grow. Usually bears have like 2 cubs. Let's just
Mm-hmm.
say black bears, for instance. But they can have 3. And it's not that common. But like, what happens more frequently than we realize too is that like maybe mother bear is growing 3 embryos, and then at some point in the pregnancy her body realizes, I do not have enough reserve to grow 3 cubs and keep mom alive. So then her body will pick one, the weakest one, and resorb it
Mm-hmm.
and redistribute those nutrients. I mean, end the life, preferentially though, to keep the other 2 and mom alive. Like, it's actually so cool and so smart. It's sad, but it's like, that is just, I guess, another example of how in biology and in nature, this is a system that works to for the purpose of life. Like, the whole purpose of this is so that the life can happen in a healthful way where it makes sense that that it's going to have like the best shot. Survival of the fittest, literally. Like, it wants it to have a good shot, and so we have to work with our bodies in this modern world and be like, hey, it's all right, it's all right. It's
Yeah,
okay.
totally. It's like you have to be actively working. I don't want to say against it because that brings a different energy. You have to constantly be working counterculture to be to thrive in our world, which is hard. You can't just do the default, and sadly, it just sucks. But the thought of that about the bears brings me back to that same concept that I want to circle back as we finish up with this episode is exactly that, because a woman's natural physiology is that she gets those groups of follicles wherever they come from and whatever choice they're chosen for. And the strongest or most important one, right? That one gets chosen and the others sacrifice themselves, right? They resorb back into the body. They don't just wait for their next turn for next month. Those are gone. That's why women eventually run out of eggs. There's a whole like thing of like, do women really run out of eggs? And is that really what causes menopause and whatever? But at the end of the day, those follicles are no more. They sacrificed themselves. The nutrients that would have gone to them are now all going to that dominant follicle. Unless you're stressed, then they go, to your muscles or whatever. So back to IVF and egg freezing, we just have to remember that and be gentle with ourselves and know that if it's important to you to optimize as much as you can, to take time and carve out some time in your life. Maybe you do take a sabbatical from work for a while, or maybe you do hire a food nanny or get food delivery or something like that, where for a few months you really, really focus, because you are now trying to be that black bear mama who has enough nutrients so that she doesn't have to resorb her third cub. Like, so sad, because we need to have all of this to try to create these healthy follicles. And then I just want to say two last things. Another little quick tip is omega-3s. Omega-3s are very helpful for egg quality. I can go into the whole science and reason as to why, but they are. So just know and trust that. The last thing I want to leave you with is the type of IVF that you do. Mini IVF is an option for some women.
Mini. So it sounded like you said Manny,
Oh,
Many,
yeah.
but you said Mini, Mini IVF.
Mini,
What is
not
that
like
in
female.
comparison to regular?
Yep. So let's just talk about that quick, because in traditional IVF or in traditional egg freezing, you are given a hormonal protocol based on your egg count, your follicle count. So you had asked earlier in the episode, do we even know? Do those even matter? In the world of IVF, they matter a lot, because they'll look and say, like for me, oh my gosh, you have 30 follicles in each ovary.
For you, like on a normal month, like just that's you
Yes.
normally. Wow.
That's polycystic ovaries.
Oh, all right.
That's
Sorry.
many follicles. Yeah, no, it's not good necessarily, but that happens either in a very young, fertile. My whole life, I've done ultrasounds. They're like, oh my God, you're so fertile. You have so many follicles. And it was only when I went through IVF that my doctor was like, oh, you have polycystic ovaries. And I'm like,
You were
what?
like,
I
oh,
don't have
okay.
PCOS. I have the lowest testosterone of anyone in the world. That can't be true. But I can still have polycystic ovaries, and I have a very interesting relationship with insulin and my ovaries, which is the root cause of PCOS. But regardless, whether you have a lot of follicles or very few follicles, so a low follicle count, um, most IVF clinics don't take that into consideration enough. And they kind of give a more generic hormonal protocol to every woman. So they'll say, this is the hormone and the amount that you inject, leading up to ovulation. We'll kind of keep an eye on the follicles and adjust the hormones accordingly. But they are in a numbers game. A lot of IVF clinics are in a numbers game. In their mind, they're like, well, we need to make as many eggs to make as many embryos as possible, because the statistics are that it's a percentage, right? 30, I'm just making these up, but let's say 30% of the eggs that you retrieve will turn into embryos, 10% of those will be healthy, and 5% of those will, have a high success rate of transferring or something. It's a numbers game. So they want to get as many as they can to do these numbersy statistics. I get why they do that. And there's another approach, which is mini IVF, where you use a lower amount of hormones. So you get less eggs, essentially, less embryos, but the idea is that the quality is higher.
Because you're not distributing the nutrients across so many.
Yeah, that's my theory. I don't know if the mini IVF doctors would say that that's what they think, because it's not only nutrients, but hormones. Hormones are also needed to make follicles into eggs. In a natural cycle, you only have so many hormones. So the majority of the hormones go to that dominant follicle. The hormones and the nutrients go to the dominant follicle. In IVF, we need more hormones, which is why we have to inject them. And in my opinion, more nutrients. Most IVF clinics don't even care about that. They should. And so if you have a little bit slightly less hormones, more than your natural cycle, but a little bit less, you're going to make less eggs, but the eggs that are there are going to get a more potent amount of the hormone and more of the nutrients. So in theory, they would be higher quality. And this, like I said, isn't a fit for every person, but in traditional IVF, we see a lot of hyperstimulation, especially for younger women. Like I was relatively young going through IVF, around 30, 31. And when you take too many hormones, you make too many eggs. You hyperstimulate. And like, let's say I had my 30 egg like follicles in each embryo. If I made 30 eggs on each side, 60 eggs,
Oof.
like
Oof.
what? I mean, it can send women to the hospital. I mean, sometimes, I mean, in rare occasions, death. Obviously, we would try to like mitigate that, but you have to be hospitalized. It's terrible. It's uncomfortable. It's absolutely not something you
Because
want
they're getting so big.
because they're getting so big. It causes a lot of edema and like fluid going into that area. I mean, it's just something that's not, the body's not meant to have 60 eggs at a time or even, 30. So mini IVF is something to consider. The same. So for me, with like lots of follicles, that's why I chose mini IVF. For a woman who has very low egg count, she might also choose that because they're focusing more on quality, to get just one or two really good quality versus let's try and shoot for the stars and try to get 10 and then we miss the mark and none of them are healthy, like
Gosh,
our
that's
apple
hard.
analogy.
There's just like no crystal ball, and it's
I
that choice would be
know.
so hard because it's so much money, and it's like,
It
which
is.
way do you go? Like, which direction do you try to choose? Ugh,
I know. And I mean,
so
I've
hard.
seen I've seen people who do the traditional way, they hyperstimulate, they make, 20 embryos and they've transferred 5, they've all failed. It's heartbreaking. Just because you have 20 embryos doesn't mean you're guaranteed a baby because for some reason it could have been that none of them were high quality or there was something not quite right. Obviously everyone's situation is different. And I'm not saying that you must do mini IVF to be successful. I have a lot of patients that do traditional IVF and have successful babies, but I'm just saying it's another thing to think about when we
More
talk about
options.
quality.
Yeah, yeah, more options
That's
for
kind of more alternative that a lot of people are unaware of in a way.
yeah, and maybe there's more people like you than that are wondering about the same thing. They don't want to hyperstimulate, and or
Yeah.
they also maybe just don't want to have then that like moral dilemma on the back end of multiple embryos and what do we
Mhm.
do? Because
Right.
that's hard and
Yeah,
expensive
it
to
is.
just maintain them.
It is. It's expensive to maintain them and it's hard. A lot of people, philosophically have a hard time with that. So if you must go through IVF, like I had a patient recently who was it was really hard for them, especially with their faith and everything that they believed in to go down that path, but they did everything possible for years and years and years and years and years and years. And it's like this was the route that they eventually decided on. They prayed about it a lot. And it's like they weren't the kind of people who wanted to make 20 embryos. They wanted just enough embryos to grow their family. And honestly, I felt that way too. Like we made 4, we've transferred 3, 1 has failed. We have 1 more. Whether he'll fail or not, I don't know, but it's like if I had 20 more, I mean, that's hard for some people. Some people it's not, but it's IVF brings up so many things and so many like philosophical questions and ideas and stuff. And at the end of the day, I'm so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for the people who invented it and created it. And I wouldn't have my children without it. So, yeah, it's like I'm in a very interesting spot with that. And I just want to help people as much as possible so that they don't have to, go through multiple rounds and do all of that. Um, and the other thing I just want to plug at the end, which a lot of people listening might not be thinking about egg freezing. I think a lot of women think, oh, I'll just freeze my eggs when I'm young and then I'll be able to like have babies whenever I want. Unfortunately, just like all the things I talked about, if you're not very healthy and you go in and freeze your eggs, like you're freezing potentially not very healthy eggs.
Yeah, like
So
like epigenetically not healthy, nutrient wise not healthy, DNA
yeah, so
status
don't
not
just
healthy.
think
Yeah.
like I can go party and drink alcohol all weekend and eat, crappy and be on my birth control and I'm just gonna like pop off, freeze my eggs really quick, go back on, and then like anytime I want, I can have a baby. I think some people think of it like that. And it's not necessarily the case because you're freezing in time, whatever the health was of you at that time. And yes, age is on your side if you're younger because age over time, whether it's we have more time to be exposed to these things that break down DNA, or there is inherently an age factor in mitochondrial and DNA impact. But just because you're young does not mean you're healthy. And just because you freeze your eggs does not mean it guarantees you a baby. So even if you're going through that process, it behooves you to take the time to work on your health and optimize as much as you can before doing it. And if you start to implement these practices, hopefully, most likely, all things considering, as long as the partner that you choose is healthy and well, you probably will be able to conceive on your own. I just see this like dysfunctional culture where people don't want to work on their health. They just freeze their eggs thinking it's like this thing that they can get away with not needing to work on their health. But it's just not, unfortunately, the case.
Yeah, like we just need to be cognizant and aware of how we could do that the best. And it's like 4 months of your life, 3 or 4 months to get really nitty gritty and knuckle down is like, the bare minimum that we can give our kids.
Yeah.
And in our experience too, and understanding that like your outcome of being able to get pregnant, all these different things will be much drastically improved. Your pregnancy itself, your pregnancy health risks, the way that you'll be treated at your birth because you do or do not have certain diagnoses like preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. Like it trickles down a lot. And also just like taking care of this is the chronic illness stuff is so tough. Like I was getting into an argument with my son the other day because he was just like, he thinks we're so strict. And I'm like, homie,
Oh
we
my God, you
are
guys are not that strict.
no. I'm like, you have literally no idea. Like I thought if I wasn't married to who I'm married to, who I absolutely love, but he is just by the whim sometimes when it comes to like food choices and whatever for the kids. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, fine. Like somehow we're blended into this. My kids have eaten things that I just like did not think that they would, I guess. If I were solo parenting, it would just be different, I guess. I'll
Yeah.
just say that. But and so I was explaining to him that like we are really like not strict and it could be so much different. But also the reason why I'm such a stickler about certain things, I was talking about like his bedtime and um fast food and different stuff like that is because I was like, you don't know this yet. And I'm not trying to put this on your like sweet little 9-year-old heart, but like 50 something percent of children growing up right now have some sort of like a chronic illness. And
Yeah.
a lot of that we don't really exactly quote unquote like know why or what exactly is happening with epigenetics. And it's just scary. And I'm like, I'm trying very hard to do the best that I can
Mhm.
with the factors that I can control with you guys. Like there's so much that we is outside of our control. And I was like, when you're 18, you can go do whatever you want. But I'm hoping that you'll have learned some
Yeah.
habits and understanding too about like just because it's on the shelf doesn't make it safe. Just because like it's there doesn't mean that it's a good idea or that it's like nourishing and we need to talk about these things and rah, rah, rah. Why do we use these things? We don't use those things. Why don't we do that? And I mean, yeah, again, it's like every one individual person is going to pick and choose the things that resonate with them about like the priority of it. Like there's certain stuff that I don't care about, like water wipes. I use water wipes all the time. And I know the crunchy community hates them because there's 0.1% benzyl something
Yeah.
alcohol, whatever from the grapefruit seed extra. I'm just like, that does
Yeah.
not bother me, you guys. Like,
Right.
that's not my battle I'm trying to pick right now. But I'll be damned if my kids are eating like gushers,
Yeah.
like that's not
Right.
happening.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. I know. I know.
So,
I know.
everybody's going to be different where they're going to prioritize their different stuff. And we're not trying to like shame or blame or
Mm-mm.
anything, just information because you particularly see so many women and couples unfortunately led down this promise of IUI, IVF, whatever, as if it's like definitely guaranteeing to give you a baby. And it's just unfortunately not. And unfortunately, there is this huge equation that a lot of the clinics, because they have no nutritional training in their background and their college education are leaving out. And it's like,
Mhm.
hello, like this is where humans just want to out technology biology. You cannot let's make a shirt.
Oh,
You
yeah.
cannot out technology biology. Well, no, but,
Oh,
but you can though, kind of, because I mean,
but it doesn't end well. I don't know.
well, I mean,
I think
no, because then that's kind of like shamey. It's like, no, we can use technology. Well, okay, what could it be? Like
Hmm.
we should work with biology. I don't know. I don't know. We'll think about it. We'll go up
We
with
should live in the world. Yeah, I don't know. We'll think of something clever.
Yeah, but
No,
just
it's
that's
so
my
true.
point is just that you don't wanna see any more families, um, suffer, like, because they just didn't know,
Yeah,
I just
well,
didn't
and
know.
I'll just, like, end on this story. So this is one of my patients who went through IVF before she came to me, and all of their embryos were euploid, meaning not healthy chromosomes. So they would not have become a living being. Um, and so we're obviously thinking quality, right? The quality, your chromosomes to a large degree are a reflection of the quality of the eggs and the sperm that came together to make that combined, being. And so we want to optimize egg and sperm quality, right? So she started working with me. Her husband was doing as best he can. You know, they're not always perfect, but they do the best they can. And she was doing a lot of things too. And like we really hit home, you know, for a couple months. And then she went through another round of IVF. And I think she had like 3 or 4, maybe or 2 or 3. I don't know. It wasn't like a ton, but it was enough healthy embryos. And she transferred one. And I know she just gave birth like a couple months ago. I know. It's like these stories are so special, but you can just see same person, same couple, just a few months apart, but changing some of these things that I've talked about and the power of that. And it's really cool. And it could have been a total fluke thing that had no influence on anything we did. Sure, totally. It could have been. But based on the science, yeah,
Unlikely.
based on the science and the research and what we know and all these things, my guess is that what she did and the things that she brought in had an influence on that.
Wow,
So
thanks for sharing that. That's
this
awesome.
isn't just do this stuff theoretically. Like we do see that it really changes. And maybe for some people, like I've had those people too, they do this stuff and then they get pregnant naturally. Like I had, gosh, I can't remember if it was a friend or a patient at this point. They went in to start their IVF round and they made them take a pregnancy test, you know, just to make sure, and they were pregnant, you know? So that happens a lot too in cases where people are maybe shuttled into IVF prematurely or because they were in a state where optimizing would have been ideal for them, but they hadn't done it yet. You know, it doesn't mean you'll necessarily need IVF. In a case like my husband and I's, you know, maybe some miraculous way we could conceive at some point, but Mike's like, I'll always wonder if you ever conceive, you know, without IVF. Like, did you cheat on me or something? I'm like, that's really funny, but I would never.
Oh my God,
I know,
sad.
so sad. I'm like, if we had like a miracle baby, I would never cheat on you. But he would wonder. He'd be like, what? How did that happen?
Well, also, your babies come out looking exactly like him, so it doesn't really matter.
So true, which is really special because we, for a long time, didn't think he would have biological children. So the fact that they look like him is so, so special. But if you're a person who has to do a sperm donor or an egg donor, know that your children are going to be just as much your children. I know that that's a thing that people have to decide on sometimes, and it is the only thing that works for them. And that's okay. You know, everyone's on their journey, and there's lots of things to unpack and all of that. So,
well, thanks for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us, and I hope that this, you know, the listeners find this helpful.
Thanks. Let's take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors. Do you have your heart set on starting a family and are eagerly preparing to begin trying within the year? Have you been actively trying to conceive for several months? Do you have a burning desire to optimize your chances of conception and avoid the distressing path of infertility? Or have you been navigating infertility for a while, yet you yearn for new solutions, a supportive environment, and an approach that addresses the root causes of infertility? Our current fertility system is broken. Many couples receive almost zero support on optimizing their health and improving their chances of conceiving before or while trying to have a baby. 1 in 7 couples end up trying for over a year and then are often shuttled into the medication or reproductive technologies route like IVF. Although there is a time and a place for these tools, so many couples would have different outcomes if they had the education, resources, and support I provide in my fertility formula program. This program is a step-by-step, doctor-designed, holistic fertility solution for the couple who wants to conceive optimally. And it includes everything a couple needs to know with all of the resources I've created over many years seeing patients in practice. From mastering the cycle to boosting egg and sperm quality, balancing hormones, investigating female and male fertility, having access to order your own labs, both hormones and functional medicine labs, nourishing the body with eating and managing that whole aspect, fostering fertility energy, ditching toxins, reducing stress, rebalancing the gut and vaginal microbiomes, and detoxing prior to pregnancy. This program has it all. On top of that, it includes the bonus modules of breaking up with birth control, optimizing IVF if that ever becomes needed, and my pregnancy loss guide. This is the holistic information and step-by-step guidance you aren't getting from your regular doctor that will only improve your chances of conception and the health of your future baby, no matter where you are along your fertility journey, or no matter what support you might need, whether that's getting pregnant naturally or going through IUI or IVF. Visit www.womanhoodwellness.com/fertilityformula and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15% off the entire program. Again, that's www.womanhoodwellness.com/fertility formula and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15%.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Healthy as a Mother podcast. In order for others to hear this information, please leave a review with Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and send to a friend who could benefit from this content. We're so excited to share more on becoming and being a mother next time.
And please remember that the ideas and views of this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for medical care of any kind, including the diagnosis or treatment of any illness or disease. Consult with your provider before integrating this information into your own care plan. And remember, a healthier future starts now, and it starts with you.